I call the February 19th, 2024 meeting of the Legislative Commission on Pensions and Retirement to order. A quorum is present. The first item on our agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. We have meeting minutes from February 12th, 2024. Senator Frantz, have you had a chance to review the minutes?
Madam Chair, I have reviewed the minutes. I find them to be in order, and I would move that we adopt and approve the meeting minutes from February 12th, 2024.
Thank you. Senator Frantz moves approval of the February 12th, 2024 meeting minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails, and the minutes are adopted. Our next item is approval of the actuarial assumption changes for the MSRS General and Legislators Plan, Para General Plan, and TRA. I will have our nonpartisan staff explain the motion and the need for it. Executive Director Susan Lecheski, if you could please explain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. One of the duties of the Commission is to review and approve actuarial assumptions used by the pension plan actuaries in their annual actuarial valuations. The use of assumptions allows the actuaries to calculate assets and liabilities into the future, which is information needed by the pension plan boards in the legislature and the members to ensure that the plan is sustainable. Assumptions include mortality, payroll growth, and rates of disability, early retirement, normal retirement, and withdrawal or termination of employment. Another assumption that we spent many hours considering last session is the assumption for investment rate of return. That requires legislation to change, and that is not one of the assumptions under review today. The process for changing assumptions other than the investment rate of return starts with an experience study. The three plans we're talking about today conducted a 4-year experience study. These experience studies are intended to check actual experience against the assumptions that have been used. Once the actuary completes that, they are able to then fine-tune the assumptions and present that to the plan for adoption or approval. The Pension Funds Board then approves the assumption changes recommended by the plan actuary. The boards of MSRS, Para, and TRA approve the recommended assumption changes at recent board meetings. The assumption changes cannot take effect until they are sent to the Commission. In your board materials or Commission materials, you'll see that the directors have sent letters to the Commission requesting approval of the assumption changes. Those letters are attached to the motion. The Commission can approve them for use in the next valuation or not take action, in which case the pension plan can use the new assumptions in the valuation a year later. The Commission looks to its own retained actuary, VIA Actuarial Solutions, to review the experience studies and recommend to the Commission whether we should approve the proposed new assumptions. VIA has done that, reviewed the actuarials or the experience studies, and they have informed us in recent reports that they do approve and recommend that the new assumptions be adopted by the Commission. If any member of the Commission would like to see the experience studies or our actuaries report on each of them, please go to our website. There's a drop-down menu labeled Actuarial and Financial Reporting, and there is an entry there for experience studies. They run about 100 pages long each, so we did not print them out. In addition, the reports from our actuary are also filed there. In your meeting materials is a proposed motion followed by the statute that permits assumptions to be changed only if they are sent to the Commission for approval. One last note. Once the assumptions are approved by the Commission, LCPR staff revises Appendix A to the Standards for Actuarial Work. Appendix A lists for each of the pension plans the assumptions currently in effect. Those are for certain things. Those are inflation, payroll growth, salary increases, and mortality. The reason for those is that these assumptions had previously been listed in the statutes, but a few years ago that was eliminated from the statutes, and they are now included in Appendix A. Appendix A can also be found at the drop-down for actuarial and financial reporting on the LCPR website.
Thank you, Director Lecheski. And we do have a few testifiers to speak to the need for this motion as well. Our first testifier is Aaron Leonard, Executive Director of MSRS. And I think just for the ease of, just so that we can save time and maybe get you all out of here early, is maybe we just have Doug Anderson, Executive Director of Para, and Jay Stoffel, Executive Director of TRA. If you could all just go up at the same time, and then we could just rotate through the three of you. If you can go ahead and introduce yourself and state your name for the record.
Great. Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Erin Leonard. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota State Retirement System. I don't have much to add. Ms. Linchusky described the process very well. It's in our memorandum. I will note that this will save the funds, the general plan, about 0.2% of pay, primarily because of the mortality improvement scale changes, rolling back some of that mortality that was recognized in 2015. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Anderson.
Morning, Madam Chair, Commission members. Doug Anderson, Executive Director for Para. Similar to Ms. Leonard, these are fairly routine changes, fairly minor, with kind of similar results as with the MSRS general plan. So really nothing more to add other than I think this is improved assumptions going forward for the plan.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Stoffel.
Morning, Madam Chair. My name is Jay Stoffel, the Executive Director for Teachers Retirement Association. And I would echo what my two colleagues have just reported. We've got some pretty standard changes that our board has approved. The Pension Commission actuary has taken a look at and is recommending approval. Our actuary is recommending approval. The only maybe slight difference, we have maybe a little bit larger impact on our fund for the changes we're making. And that would, I would kind of boil that down to the changes in the mortality tables that we're making. It's a new mortality table for public employees, specifically for teachers. And then we have a projection scale that builds in improvements every year into the future. And those two things combined are causing about a 1% reduction in the required contribution rates for TRA.
Thank you, Mr. Stoffel. Members, are there any questions? Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering if the pandemic had any, it sounds like it didn't have any impact on the mortality tables. So did you see any impact at all?
Ms. Leonard.
Madam Chair, members, we actually asked our actuary specifically about the pandemic. What they've discovered is that a lot of public employees didn't necessarily get impacted by the deaths because they did follow the quarantine and they didn't have to go out and work and be out in the public as much. That was kind of what they anecdotally said. But so right now we're not seeing a big impact from the pandemic. We still have a few more years to see what the overall impact.
Madam Chair, Senator Pappas, if I could, so we didn't see very much impact over the last few years that affected the base mortality rates. There is the projection scale of how mortality will improve in the future. And that's something the Society of Actuaries typically put out a new schedule every year. They started doing that in 2015. So they did that every year. And they didn't do this in the last year because they, forecasting future improvement is a very challenging thing to do. And they're relying on a little bit more data until they do that update. So I think that's going to be a question we'll want to look at to see what they think about what the future impact is on how rates improve. But we don't know from them right now what they're forecasting.
Any follow-up, Senator Pappas?
No.
Okay, any other questions, member? Okay, seeing no further discussion, I will move motion LCPR 24-M2 to approve the recommended actuarial assumptions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion does prevail, and the motion is approved. We now will turn to the bills on our agenda. We will be considering the resulting legislation from the Minnesota IRAP TRA work group that was approved as part of last session's policy omnibus bill. Now, when the legislation is introduced, Vice Chair Frentz and I will be introducing it for now, but we will consider Revisor's language coded 24-06717. I will move to have the Commission approve Revisor number 24-06717 be recommended to pass and be incorporated into the Omnibus Pension and Retirement Bill. I will let our nonpartisan staff explain the bill. Executive Director Linchusky, please explain the bill, Revisor number 24-06717.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Please see the staff memo in your materials, which summarizes the bill. In addition to that, it also gives a brief history of the ability of Minnesota State employees to transfer from the Higher Education Individual Retirement Account Plan, or IRAP, to TRA. Also describes the work of the work group and its members, and notes that special legislation or legislation for the benefit of a single person should be avoided if possible. There's also an issue brief from House Research talking about special legislation and the fact that it's unconstitutional if a general bill would be able to fix the problem. At the outset, I want to provide just a very brief overview of why the Commission has had to deal with this topic for so many years. For many years, employees of the Minnesota State system have been allowed to transfer retirement coverage from the IRAP, which is a defined contribution plan offered by Minnesota State, to TRA, which is a defined benefit plan. This was in recognition of the fact that many public employees prefer a pension plan where investment risk is entirely borne by the pension plan in the state over a defined contribution plan where investment risk is borne by the participant. The problem is that this right to transfer doesn't last forever. 1 year after the date of hire, and again, 1 year after the date the employee gets tenure. The window closes, and if an employee did not know about the transfer right, the employee misses the window, and there's no way to change that. So when the employee finds out about the window, and having missed it, the employee's only option is to come to the legislature and get a bill that allows that person to transfer. In 2023, the Commission had decided that there was enough of that, and decided that a work group should be formed to formulate general legislation to address the right, the need for a transfer right after these windows closed. The bill in front of you is the product of the work group. The bill accomplishes 3 goals. Minnesota State employees who did not know about the right to transfer to TRA will be able to elect a transfer, and there will be some funding available to help them pay for the purchase of past service credit when they are in TRA. The bill then results in no unfunded liability for TRA, an important part of this effort, and it was a requirement, actually, of the session law that formed the work group. And Minnesota State will not have to fund a portion of the actuarial cost of the TRA pension when the employee moves from the IRAP over to TRA, and their IRAP account can't cover the entire cost. The rest of my summary will be a brief section-by-section review of the bill and Amendment 1A. Sections 1 to 3 provide 2 new definitions and amend an existing definition in the chapter. The 2 new definitions, IRAP to TRA transfer account and offset amount, relate to funds that will be made available as a result of a one-time appropriation to help fund the purchase of past service credit. Section 4 is a new statute to be inserted into Chapter 354B, which is the chapter that governs the IRAP. Subdivision 1 provides new definitions used in the new statutory section. Subdivision 2 is a general statement of what the new section 354B.215 does. That is, it authorizes eligible persons to transfer from the IRAP to TRA and purchase past service credit. Subdivision 3 defines eligible person. That is a person who is employed by Minnesota State, has an account in the IRAP, and Minnesota State has no record that the person received notice of the right to transfer from the IRAP to TRA. Subdivision 4 describes the application that the employee must submit to Minnesota State and requires Minnesota State to respond within 60 days by issuing a determination as to whether the employee is eligible for a transfer, and if so, then forward the application to TRA. Subdivision 5 requires TRA to calculate the amount of service credit the eligible person will be able to purchase with the person's IRAP account, and how much more would be needed to purchase the maximum past service credit. That maximum past service credit is the amount of service that the employee would have had they been in TRA from the start of their employment at Minnesota State, or since they became eligible for the IRAP. Since the amount of state funding to be made available to the employee depends on the purchase amount, TRA must also calculate the amount of state funding, the offset amount. TRA must inform the eligible person of these amounts within 90 days. Subdivision 6 gives the eligible person 60 days to elect the transfer. If the person elects the transfer, the person's IRAP account must be transferred to TRA, and Minnesota State must transfer the offset amount or the state funding to TRA from the IRAP to TRA transfer account. If the IRAP account plus the offset amount is not sufficient to purchase the maximum past service credit, the eligible person can transfer other funds to TRA, such as from another supplemental and retirement plan over at Minnesota State. Subdivision 7 states that after going through all the foregoing steps, the eligible person irrevocably becomes a TRA member and is no longer an active member of the IRAP. Subdivision 8 requires TRA to give vesting credit for all years of service at Minnesota State. Subdivision 9 requires Minnesota State to provide periodic notice to its employees about the new transfer right. Subdivision 10 requires Minnesota State and TRA to report to the Commission annually on the number of employees who elected a transfer in the prior year. This is where Amendment 1A comes into play. The session law that established the work group imposed certain requirements as to the contents of these reports. Subdivision 10 includes these requirements in the bill, even though 2 items are no longer relevant because of the new procedures. Amendment 1A eliminates these 2 sort of unnecessary requirements. One of which was the cost of the transfer to Minnesota State. There's no longer any cost. And the second is the actual cost of the new TRA benefit. No reason for that calculation to be done. It also then, Amendment 1A adds 2 requirements that are relevant. One is that the report should indicate for each eligible person the total amount transferred by the eligible person from the IRAP and other sources, and provide the offset amount, which is the state money. Subdivision 11 establishes a new IRAP to TRA transfer account, which is the account to which the one-time appropriation will be transferred. Minnesota State is in charge of this account and directs the transfer of the offset amount each time an eligible person elects to transfer. Section 5 is a session law that provides for the one-time appropriation from the general fund to the IRAP to TRA transfer account. The effective date for the bill is January 1, 2025. Chair Hurd, would you please the summary?
Thank you, Executive Director Susan Linczewski. So in light of the explanation of the bill and that there is an amendment, Vice Chair Frenz, would you like to offer the 1A amendment?
I would, Madam Chair. I'd move that the 1A amendment to the revisor number 24-06717 language.
Any discussion to the 1A amendment? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. The motion prevails, and the 1A amendment to revisor number 24-06717 is adopted. Back to the language as amended. We now move to our testifiers, and if testifiers, I will say all of the names just so you know what order you are in, because there's only 5 testifiers, but if you could come up as the other person is wrapping up. The first testifier is Richard Casper, Benefits and Equity Representative, Interfaculty Organization. After that will be Chris Dale, Senior Assistant Director of Labor Relations. After Chris is Holly Dayton, Legislative Liaison for Teachers Retirement Association. Then Devin Bruce, Director of Legislative and Political Affairs with Minnesota Association of Professional Employees. And then Josh Lease, Legislative Chair, Minnesota State University Association of Administrative and Service Faculty. So, Mr. Casper, if you are ready, please identify yourself for the record. And begin.
Hello. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Richard Casper, legal counsel for the Interfaculty Organization, the exclusive representative of the State University faculty members. This bill is the result of a great deal of work since last session that was put in by a committee of stakeholders that included representatives of the unions representing all of the employees affected, the representatives of TRA, representatives of the MNSCU system as well as invaluable support from the staff of the Commission throughout. I should also point out that both the Chair and Vice Chair made very valuable input to the working group's endeavors. This bill is an attempt to resolve, as Ms. Linczewski pointed out, an ongoing difficulty that results from the complexity and of our pension system in the Minnesota State colleges and university system. that gives employees agency, gives them a choice between two different plans, but also out of necessity has to put some limits on when that choice is exercised. Necessity not only of administrative practicality, but also of avoiding issues of adverse selection, where at some point people have got to stick with the choice they've made and see it through as best they can and not be looking to move the cost of mistakes they might have made relative to the other choice onto third parties. At the same time, this complex system places an unusual burden on new employees to figure out just what their options are and when. And it's very important that we get them information about how to make that, what the choice is and how to make it. It has become clear that not everybody gets this information in the manner that they should. And some of those folks have been coming to you folks over the years with constitutionally dubious legislation requests, which are hard to turn down at the same time. This bill presents what we think is an equitable and balanced approach to creating an administrative route to handle this situation. We would urge its passage. It allows folks who can show that they really didn't obtain the information that we try very hard to get them early on in their career. Folks who can show that will have an opportunity while they're still employed to move from IRAP to TRA. They have to invest all of their IRAP funds to do that. They may be able, if those funds are insufficient, to tap into the appropriated fund that we're asking to set up on a one-time basis, significantly as an incentive for people to do this, for people who are in this situation, to get it done before that fund is exhausted. And finally, if they wish to invest other defined contribution employer-based benefits in a TRA pension, if there's still room to do that given their experience card. Thank you. We urge your passage, and we hope that this will put an end to the need for special legislation in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Casper. I'm going to maybe actually ask if there's any questions to hold it until the end, till all the testifiers are done. So if we could have Chris Dale, Senior Assistant Director of Labor Relations, Minnesota State, if you could come up. Please identify yourself for the record and begin.
Madam Chair, my name is Christopher Dale. I'm the Senior System Director for Labor Relations for the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities. I'm here today to convey Minnesota State's strong support for the proposed legislation. It provides a codified pathway for employees who believe they did not receive an opportunity to elect the coverage of the defined benefit pension plan as administered by TRA. The absence of such a pathway has long been a sore spot for these aggrieved employees, Minnesota State, and as it turns out, members of the Pension Commission as well. We want to thank the members of the Pension Commission for seeing to the passage of the legislation that enacted and chartered the IRAP to TRA work group. That group worked diligently to provide guidance on the legislation for a path forward to address the concerns of these employees. We believe that the work group approach adopted is the right one and has produced a sound draft legislation for the Pension Commission to consider. We want to thank the participants of the work group. There were representatives from TRA and Minnesota State and the exclusive representatives of the employee groups who are affected or participate in the IRAP plan. All the folks who participated in the work group, I think, focused on it's fair to say that they focused on the larger issue and providing for a workable solution to the problem of the aggrieved employees, and we thank them for that. And finally, Minnesota State would like to thank the staff of the Pension Commission who worked so diligently to prepare the bill, prepare multiple versions of the legislation to address the concerns. Ms. Lencheski, Mr. Kelly, and Ms. Deslin all helped us a great deal, and we are very thankful for that. And finally, I just want to note that Chair Hurd, yourself, and Vice Chair Senator Frantz made time for this work group and participated on several occasions, which was very valuable to us. And I think signified the concern of the Pension Commission to the members of the work group, and we appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. And up next is Holly Dayton, Legislative Liaison for Teachers Retirement Association. Please identify yourself for the record and begin.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is Holly Dayton. I'm the Legislative Liaison for the Teachers Retirement Association. I'll echo what my counterparts said up here. We appreciated the opportunity to engage in this conversation through a working group. I think that was a prudent way to approach this. TRA's fundamental concern when heading into this project, in accordance with our duties towards our fund and our members, and in accordance with the enacting legislation, was to ensure that the TRA fund would be made whole, meaning not take on additional liabilities as a result of any resulting transfers from this work group. So we're satisfied that the resulting proposal will make TRA whole, and we are prepared to do our part to facilitate any transfers for eligible individuals should this legislation become law. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dayton. Up next is Devin Bruce, Director of Legislative and Political Affairs of Minnesota Association of Professional Employees.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is Devin Bruce. I'm the Director of Legislative and Political Affairs at the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees, MAPE. We represent over 17,000 state professionals across all boards, agencies, and commissions. I first want to thank you for the opportunity to testify, and also thank Chair Herr and Vice Chair Frantz for participating in the group during the interim, as well as the LCPR staff for really trying to wordsmith a lot of our concerns and address them very quickly to get to this proposal. We'd like to voice our support for this, this bill going forward. We do have two things that we'd like to highlight. The crucial piece of this legislation is the appropriation to offset any of the amount that the employee is not able to pay due to either fluctuations in the IRAP account or the funds themselves, to ensure that they're made whole at the end. The other piece that we'd like to also point out is the commitment by Minnesota State made at the work group to help address some of these concerns about the record keeping issue, which is the whole reason why we have the need for this legislation. And we look forward to working with them on that to ensure that none of these issues come back up again despite the legislation, and therefore need to come back to the legislature and ask for more money. So thank you for your time, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. And our last testifier is Josh Leese, Legislative Chair, Minnesota State University Association of Administrative and Service Faculty. Please identify yourself for the record and begin.
Good morning. I'm Josh Leese. I'm the Legislative Chair for the Administrative and Service Faculty at Minnesota State, affiliated with Teamsters Local 320. I agree with all of my colleagues from the work group and thank the Chair and Vice Chair for their participation in the work group and all the work from that work and Susan's great leadership of it. On behalf of 800 ASF members who want to support the bill at hand, this will directly impact members who never got the rights to select the benefit plan of their choice. These members did nothing wrong. They didn't get the information. They didn't even know they had the opportunity in many of these cases. And this positions them to actually make a choice for the plan of that they want for their retirement. It's extremely important that the appropriation be attached with this bill. These members did nothing wrong. They didn't know that they had the right to make this change, and some of them are going to come up a little bit short. And without that appropriation, the only people that are going to bear any responsibility for this mistake and this problem would be the employee themselves. That doesn't meet the standards of fairness or justice. The issue of risk was brought up, but for the members that we have no record for that they were actually given their choices, they didn't make it an assumption of any of that risk. They were assigned that risk. They were told this is the plan you're in and you're stuck with it. And many of them have been asking for years, for an opportunity to make a change, to look for a path forward, and we're told there's nothing that you can do. So we would ask that this bill be moved forward, that this would be passed, and that the appropriation be attached to it. Thank you, and if you have any questions, be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Lees. And before I open it up to questions, I do just want to comment really briefly that I appreciate everyone who came to the table to work on this work group. Everybody was extremely committed in finding a solution. I know that sometimes, you know, I'm a little bit tough when it comes to saying how, we don't need to look at who's responsible, but how do we fix the problem going forward? And that you all came with thoughts and ideas of how compromises could be made so that we could find a solution. So I just want to say much gratitude to all those who showed up over the interim and worked really hard on this, and to our staff who really never gets to be done, even though we're out of session. You continue to work through these issues, and so thank you so much for that. And with that, I will open this up to any comments or questions from our members. Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. First, for Ms. Linczewski, in Section 2 of the bill, there's conversation about the offset amount. And I was wondering if you could provide some historical context. Is what we're doing in Section 2 more or less generous than what we would typically do when we basically considered individual cases before the commission? And what I mean by that is, you know, did the individual members who are seeking to make the transfer, did they have to pay for the difference, or did we typically ask TRA to eat the cost?
Director Linczewski.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Hearn, Senator Rasmussen. The chart in your materials does provide, it's cut off on mine, but it does provide the actuarial present value of the purchase. I guess the chart is not going to tell us. So what we don't know when the calculation was done over at TRA, we don't know whether the IRAP account was enough to cover the actual cost. We're still guessing. So this was sort of somewhat randomly generated. It's the lesser of 25% of what they need to purchase all of the service credit, or $10,000. So some of the special legislation that we did last session, there would have been coverage for, I think, 4 of the people. They would have had enough there to purchase the entire actual cost. Not in the case of Ms. Moore, who had a much bigger purchase. So it's pretty random, but maybe Minnesota State can give us some context for that.
Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Linczewski, for that. And I think that's an important point that, we were kind of, if we look at over history, kind of haphazard in terms of how much, we were effectively subsidizing that transfer or not subsidizing that transfer. And so I think it's good that we're looking at a more standard approach. An additional question, Madam Chair, I had, and I don't know if this is for TRA or for anyone else who participated, but do we know how many IRAP participants would be potentially eligible for this transfer? And then kind of a follow-up question on that is, for the appropriation in Section 5, do we have some estimate of what would be required to fund this program?
Thank you, Senator Rasmussen. And I don't know if maybe Director Linczewski maybe has some thoughts on this. No. If we could have our testifiers come back up to the table so that you could answer some of these questions.
We can always pull a couple chairs.
Yeah, and we can actually pull up chairs so that everybody can just be up there at the same time, if that's okay. And I don't know who would like to take that, would like to answer that for Senator Rasmussen, or if you heard the question, if you need him to repeat it.
Madam Chair, I could take an initial shot. Is my understanding that there are several thousand who are conceivably eligible for this. Of course, that ultimately those folks are going to have to aver to actually be eligible that they did not know, that they did not receive notice of their options during the original time window. And of course, it's very difficult to know just how many folks might fall into that category. I suspect it's a very small number, but that's more intuitive than scientific. Thank you.
Senator Rasmussen, is there a follow-up? And there was, I think you had 2 questions in your original question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the first question was how many IRAP participants are eligible, and it sounds like there'd be potentially quite a few, especially if they are saying that they did not have the notification of this potential transfer. I guess the follow-up question on that is, do we have For the blank appropriation in section 5, do we have any estimate on what that cost will be or what it could be, or over the course of this session, are we going to get any more details on just how much we're talking about?
I don't know if one of our testifiers would like to answer that, but I do know I've had discussions with our staff on what potentially this could be. As we all know, there will probably be very little and informed of what is available to fund or appropriate, but that this is, again, it would be a guess as well because we don't have the numbers. And so we're looking at other alternatives of where potentially if they're to fund this, where that might come from, Senator Rasmussen. And that's not a good answer, but that's an honest answer of where we are right now with that and what it might be. Do any of our testifiers have anything they'd like to add to that?
Madam Chair, Chris Dale on behalf of Minnesota State. Dick Casper's estimate, outside estimate of the maximum number of employees that might be eligible is more or less in line with our analysis. We have continued to dig into records. This is the problem, is that from our perspective, it's one of largely of record keeping, particularly for those employees who had periods of eligibility prior to 2011. And as we do that, we have been able to continue to whittle away the number of people for whom we find no record at all. And that's, from our perspective, good news. But as to the estimated amount, I like you, cannot provide a good gauge.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. Mr. Dale. And Mr. Lees.
Josh Lees, it's also important to remember that this is a little bit of a moving target as well, as people are constantly moving in and out of of employment and retiring and moving on as well. So it's definitely a moving target.
And Senator Rasmussen, I think too, that's why in the section that Ms. Linczewski talked about the reporting and bringing it back to us, I think that as time goes on, we may be able to get a better gauge of how many each year and how we can eventually hit a pattern to understand what could be into the future. So my hope is that with future reporting, we'll be able to have a more accurate number on that.
Thank you.
Any follow-up? Thank you. I have Senator Pappas.
Madam Chair, my comment question is along that line. You know, in the past, when individuals have come in and requested this, usually there's been an attempt to find some kind of responsibility. And so that the employee, if the employer was responsible and they kind of admitted it, that they didn't distribute the notices, then the employer would kick in an amount and the employee, of course, would transfer all their money from IRAP. If the employee was responsible, then they had to pay the full actuarial cost. So this is an attempt, I'm assuming, kind of a no-fault attempt. We don't really know whose fault it is, employer or employee, so forget about fault, transfer all the money, and then if there is a gap, then the state will step in and help fill that gap to a relatively small extent. I'm talking about $10,000. So that's my comment, if I understand this right. Then my question is, though, how are we going to pass a bill with an appropriation? We don't know if we have a target, if we don't have, we don't kind of have that number at hand. Because we can only appropriate into this account what we think might be spent.
I mean,
Mr. Casper.
if I may, Madam
From the
Chair,
work group.
Senator Pappas, I believe the assumption on the working committee, and people can disagree with me, is that it would be initially a bit of a shot in the dark, and that the fund might initially be exhausted before, you know, if enough people came along and each hit that $10,000 cap to exhaust the fund, that could occur. I'll be frank that way.
And then, Madam Chair, how do we pick a number then? Is it your intention then to not incorporate this bill until we have a clear number? Is it your intention to wait till you have a target, or what is your intention, Madam?
Senator Pappas, thank you for the question. So what I understand in the past is that regardless of the situation, the Minnesota State actually would have to come in and pay for whatever was the cost of it. And so this doesn't actually change any of how it might have been funded in the past, in that we're looking for funds to actually help offset the situation, which, like you said, it is really difficult. We're going to put this through, hoping to identify where that might be able to come from, but this actually doesn't, this process of which identifying individuals and being proactive about creating a process so that we don't have individual legislation, that is the, really the core of this, and that needs to get passed. And so we will continue as we have in the past, and if it does come forward and we are able to get funds, we will apply those, but that in the past, based on what has been done, Minnesota State has been the one that's actually paid for when there has been a cost. And if I've said that incorrectly, please, please correct me if I'm wrong.
I believe you're correct, Madam Chair, that
And so that would remain the same, Senator Pappas.
Madam Chair, Chris Dale on behalf of Minnesota State, it is the case that the individualized bills tended to arrive only when there was a clear lack of record keeping by Minnesota State. And those folks who, as Senator Pappas suggested, where the employee was at fault, so to speak, there was no option. And it seems that the individualized legislation was an extremely kind of haphazard approach to addressing this issue. And the bill itself, even without the funding, provides a much more coherent and available solution to these folks. And we think makes a lot of sense in that regard.
Madam Chair, or Ms. Lincheski, could you remind me again from the window that we're offering the employees? Is there a limit as to that window? Or say if there's no money in the fund this year, can they come, and they figure out they can't afford it, can they come back in future years if there should be a pocket of money for them?
Director Lincheski.
Or, oh, excuse me, I got that wrong. Minnesota State is going to pay for it. Right, okay. My question is then just limited to what the window is.
Director Lincheski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Pappas, there's, the windows we're talking about here don't actually have much to do with the process that we're going to try to put in place. So the windows are the year after you come to employment with Minnesota State, and then the year after you make tenure. So those windows are still there. We're hoping with the requirement that they provide more notice, and just sort of that Minnesota State is a little bit more on top of the information to new employees, that window will be enough time, and so new employees then will take advantage of the window.
Right, like they should have.
Yeah, that's right. So these are really addressing people who in the past missed the window. So there's a number of time periods here that need to be followed. So once the employee gets the information about how much it will cost and how much their IRAP account will purchase, they have then 60 days to make an election to do the transfer. If they blow through the 60 days, that's pretty much their opportunity. The bill doesn't address whether you could come back in future years. I suppose you could potentially come back if you decided that you shouldn't have let the 60 days pass without an election. You would come back and go through the process. That may be something that the group has an opinion on, and maybe it's something that we need to tweak, but I think it's not addressed in the bill whether you could come back and do it a second time.
Madam Chair, so at any point, if you miss the regular windows, the year after you're hired, a year after you're tenured, then there's still, you missed the notice, whatever, there still is an option for them to go this other route, this new route.
Let me just clarify, though. If it is the employee that just missed their window, they do not get to come back and say, oh, I missed my window. This is usually the situation. This is why where Minnesota State ends up paying for it is because usually it's because they don't have record that they actually gave the employee the information, so the employee missed the opportunity. So if you just missed it and you just didn't turn in your paperwork, but there's proof that you were given the information, you do not have an option. And if I'm still here, would never open that up to say, well, if you just forgot, you can just, 2 years from now, come back and ask to have this reopened. So hence, why the setup is the way that it is it's usually the employer, in the situations the employer did not provide notification, which is why Minnesota State has paid for in the past, which is why that is the continued process until we can get some funding to potentially help out offset some of that. Does that make sense, Senator Pappas?
Madam Chair, it should be relatively few numbers like we've had in the past, actually.
Absolutely, Senator Pappas. Any further questions? Senator?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Holly. Ms. Dayton.
Thank you. Holly Dayton, Legislative Liaison for TRA. I just wanted to clarify further, and my colleagues up here can disagree with me, but our understanding at TRA is that once an individual has been given the information, they've been deemed eligible for this transfer potentially by Minnesota State, they send all of that relevant information to TRA, and then we communicate with them. We'll provide an estimate as to what the cost would be for the purchase and what that would look like for them from a TRA benefit perspective. Then they have 60 days to choose whether or not to transfer. Our understanding is that at the expiration of that 60-day period, their window closes. And so we are not expecting that somebody could come back to us, you know, a year later or a year later, ask for a new calculation of the cost, because you would have to, right? It's kind of a rolling window with an actuarial cost situation, and which would, you know, that would put an additional burden on TRA. So our understanding is that in that case, person has 60 days to decide whether or not to complete the transfer. If they do not, then that's closed for them. So just wanted to clarify that.
Any further follow-up, Senator Pappas? Thank you, Senator Pappas. Senator Frantz.
Well, first of all, thanks, Madam Chair, for your leadership on this. Thanks, as always, to LCPR staff. Thanks to the work group members. We've had some success, in my opinion, at the legislature with some work groups. When you put out reasonable proposals, they seem to have traction, especially when the work group has representative membership of all the stakeholders. So thanks to you, Madam Chair, and thanks to everybody. I also want to just add, when we had the first meeting, the question was the possible burden on Minn State or TRA or both, and the language here addresses that. I know we don't have an amount of money yet, but at least we can tell our friends at Minn State, and I have 2 Minn State campuses in my district, this is an attempt to relieve the economic burden, if any, and I guess we'll have to depend on you, Madam Chair, for your outstanding target-getting skills for that, but at least we'll be able to say, we attempted to prevent Minn State from bearing any burden, and hopefully that's the way it works out. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Frantz. Any further discussion? Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So can I ask Minnesota State, what have you guys put in place to end this problem that Minnesota State has created with your inability to track records, correct? Is that not correct?
Mr. Dale, before you answer, I did just want to say really quick, and I was going to say this at the beginning of, and I should have said this earlier, but I just want to be really clear that the operations and administration of systems as large as MnSCU is big, and that I think that everybody who does their job does it with the intention to do a good job and to get people the things that they need. And I think that the people who are employees do their best to try to get everything they're supposed to back to the employer. And because of the large systems and complexities of that, sometimes people don't get what they're supposed to, and sometimes people, you know, are busy with life and they can't return certain things back to the institutions. And so this was never, this work group was never to say who isn't doing what they're supposed to do, but to say when there are complex systems and it's difficult for us to navigate or operate within them, to just make sure that we do, you know, we can never be 100% effective at everything that we do. Then when we do find that there are places in which the work is falling through, how do we fix that, and how do we ensure that we do not leave anybody behind? And so I would like to maybe position this less as who hasn't been responsible and why didn't they do their job, more as the legislation hasn't always been clear as to who's responsible for what and when. And then because of the complexities, in addition to that, we have the situations we do, and that's why we're here to fix that. And so with that sort of being the foundation of that, Mr. Dale, if you could respond to Representative Doe's question about what has been changed and put into place in order to prevent some of this from happening in the future.
Madam Chair, Representative Nadeau, we believe that largely since the legislative changes in 2011, which clearly provided for a notification that was Minnesota State was responsible for and providing the election at that time, that the numbers of employees who have fallen through the crack are significantly less. And we believe that was actually a great clarification. The legislature took action to specify clearly what Minnesota State's responsibilities were in that case. It is our sense, and I think that Chair Herr has correctly stated the sense of the work group, which was to focus on a solution as opposed to fixing the blame. but instead to fix the problem. It is our sense that in many instances, this is really, is really a record-keeping issue, and it's not so much, it's not always clear that the election wasn't known or wasn't offered, but we do find ourselves in a position with these older records, particularly prior to 2011, struggling at times to find records. Sometimes we will have a record, for example, as minimal as a comment in our electronic system, information system of record, which indicates that an election was offered. And if we have that, then we have something. But there are instances where we don't, and it has been those instances that have turned into these pieces of special legislation.
Representative Nadeau.
Thank you. And so, back to my original question, what have we done formally to solve that? And again, I wasn't trying to place blame. I don't care. I mean, government, we have eligibility supports where there's rules, there's opt-ins, there's opt-outs. The students that you guys teach, there's deadlines when they can actually get into a class and when they can't. I mean, so what have you formalized? And I guess the concern that I have is we've got this open appropriation. This is a pretty good deal, and I think a fair deal for teachers that professors that missed this. So I'm just trying to get to the point where if this is just going to revolve, I mean, one of my big questions, which isn't going to have an answer for today, is what happens if the fund depletes? Is the legislature expected to refund it again? So I'm trying to get to where's the end of this population so we can make sure that we're being fair to those teachers that missed that opportunity and ensure that we're not just continuing this into the future.
Mr. Dale.
Chair, Representative Nadeau. I'm sorry, I wasn't probably as clear as I could have been, but with respect to the 2011 date, our processes did change, and we have a formal process by which we provide a notification that you have an election and the election as well. And we seek a verification that the notification was provided in addition to the election is returned, that the election is provided. So we did change our processes, and we think that has made a substantial change in the number of employees for whom we have record-keeping issues. So our sense is that this is a diminishing problem that is going away. And we believe that this legislation is an appropriate way to respond to that.
Representative, go ahead, Mr. Casper.
May I add just a little something to that. At about the same time, the legal obligation to notify folks of their obligations came in, the second election came in for permanent employees. And because of that second opportunity, I think that is the primary mechanism that has reduced the number of folks who are going to need this kind of relief, because folks have been in the job for a while, they've heard from their colleagues about what their options are. Even if you missed the initial paperwork, you're very much more likely to know by the time you reach permanence that you have this option available then for the following year. And so I think that will dramatically reduce the number of folks who are in this situation from 2011 forward.
Follow-up, Representative Nadeau?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Nadeau. Any other questions or comments or discussion? Thank you, testifiers. And seeing no further discussions, I will move the language coded Revisor number 2406717 as amended be recommended to pass and be incorporated into the Omnibus Pension and Retirement Bill. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The motion prevails, and the language coded Revisor number 2406717 as amended is recommended for passage and will be included in the Omnibus Pension and Retirement Bill. Next, we will hear the Minnesota State Retirement System Administrative Bill. When the legislation is introduced, Representative Berg and Vice Chair Frentz will be introducing it. For now, we will consider Revisor language coded number 2406834. Vice Chair Frentz, would you please move the language so the bill is in front of us?
Apologize, Madam Chair.
Vice Chair Frentz, would you please move the language so the bill is in front of us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move the language in front of us. That's Revisor number 2406830. This is the MSRS administrative bill. And members, this was brought to us from Ms. Leonard. I'm assuming we'll have some explanation of the various contents of the bill, which I'm sure is well thought out and deserves member support.
We will. Thank you, Vice Chair Friends, and my apologies for interrupting. I will now ask Ms. Leonard if she could come up to the testifiers table and explain the legislation and provide any comments. Please identify yourself for the record and begin.
Sure. Good morning, Madam Chair and members. I'm Erin Leonard, Executive Director from MSRS, and I am going to have our legislative liaison, Jenkins Vegan, provide most of the testimony, and I will be here to answer any questions.
Please identify yourself for the record and begin.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Jenkins Vegan. I'm the legislative liaison from the Minnesota State Retirement System. I'm here today to share a summary of the MSRS administrative bill. I will walk through section by section. Section 1 amends Minnesota Statutes 2022, Section 352.01, Subdivision 13, to clarify the statutes for interested parties in a grievance proceeding or legal settlement to include more specificity regarding items such as dates of the covered period and payment of interest on contributions. Section 2 amends 352.03, Subdivision 5, to remove an obsolete cross-reference regarding the salary of the Executive Director of MSRS. The new language gives the board the authority to set a salary of the Executive Director in accordance with Section 43A.18, Subdivision 1. The intent is to add a salary cap that is consistent with the salary for positions included in the managerial plan. Sections 3 and 5 amend Section 352.113, Subdivision 1, and 352.12, Subdivision 2, to clarify the vesting for disability and surviving spouse benefits is now 3 years for active employees. This is a correction from last session's change on vesting. Section 4 amends Section 352.12, Subdivision 1, to replace the outdated term reversionary annuity with bounce-back annuity, and adds more clarity to the amount payable in a refund of contributions to a former employee who does not have a surviving spouse and dies before the annuity has become payable. Section 6 amends Section 352.12, Subdivision 2B, to clarify that survivor benefit payments to a surviving child are in lieu of a refund of employee contributions and interest to make it consistent with MSRS interpretation of this provision. Sections 7 and 8 amend Minnesota Statutes 2022, Section 352.12, Subdivisions 7 and 8, to remove the obsolete term reversionary annuity and replacing it with bounce-back annuity. And finally, Section 9 amends Section 352.95, Subdivision 4, to update the language in the Correctional Plan Disability Statute to update or shall to or may. This change will allow flexibility during the disability application process to not require independent medical exam for all applicants. Madam Chair and members, thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions or comments? Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Section 9, the medical evidence and disability under the corrections plan. Given everything that this body and the legislature went through last year with police disability and some of the things that we were looking at, I'm a little concerned that I don't have clarity as to how this provision is going to work and why the change is needed. I don't want us to create another version 2 of what we corrected last year by addressing this language. So perhaps the testifiers today could provide some further clarification as to when we would and when we would not require a medical exam by changing that word from shall to may.
Ms. Leonard.
Madam Chair, Representative O'Driscoll. So with the correctional plan, they have an occupational standard as well as for disability benefits. This doesn't change the application process. They still need to provide 2 medical statements indicating their disability. This gives us flexibility at MSRS to save a little bit on administrative expenses, knowing if a person is clearly meets the definition of disability, we wouldn't have to send them to an additional independent medical exam. But it gives us the flexibility to request one if it's unclear, based on the evidence provided by the applicant.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Director Leonard, if I understand you correctly, if I am a corrections employee and I bring 2 independent medical evaluations that say disability, disability, you would then say, you know what, we probably have a disability here, so we're not going to spend money from the fund to have an independent to be 3-0, so to speak. Am I reading that correctly?
Ms. Leonard.
Madam Chair, Representative Driscoll, maybe. So it depends. So what we would do is we would take those 2 medical statements, send it to our medical advisor. They would also probably reach out for some additional medical information. And if there's ambiguity, they let us know if they recommend another independent medical exam. And so that could be an IP, a psychological evaluation, it could be medical, or it could also be like a vocational assessment. So they'll kind of recommend the thing that they think would best provide evidence.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then to that same point, a person who's on their on correctional disability, do they have the same protocol that we were talking about with police and fire and their disability, that they would have to continue to prove that they are still disabled to continue the benefit? And how would this language change affect someone who is continuing on benefit once their 3 or 5 year window came up, that they had to provide proof that they were still disabled and entitled to the disability benefit?
Ms. Leonard.
Madam Chair, Representative Driscoll, this doesn't change that. So the first 5 years, a person has to provide evidence that they are still disabled. And then after that, it's every 3 years. That remains in place and doesn't change. This language doesn't change that.
Representative O'Driscoll. Thank you. Any further discussions or comments, questions? Seeing no further discussion, Vice Chair Frenz, will you renew your motion that the language coded Revisor number 2406830 be recommended to pass and be incorporated into the Omnibus Pension and Retirement Bill?
That is my motion, Madam Chair.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The motion prevails and the language coded Revisor number 2406830 is recommended for passage within the corresponding House and Senate committees of jurisdiction. That concludes our business for today, members. Our next commission hearing will be on Monday, February 26th. We plan to hear bills and motions related to firefighters and relief associations. Seeing no further business in front of us in this committee, this meeting is adjourned.